It's my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker to you today. Our keynote speaker is Olivier Jerphagnon, and he's the founder and CEO of Agmonitor Incorporated, a company previously known as Powwow Energy. Olivier received his MS in photonics from UCSB and has been a serial entrepreneur ever since, with over 30 articles and 8 patents granted. His area of expertise is in machine learning and data analytics, and he has developed a number of novel techniques that have helped both the telecom industry and more recently, the agriculture industry. Today, Olivier and his team at Agmonitor focus on addressing climate risks at the nexus of food, energy, and water, which he'll tell us about today. Please join me in welcoming Olivier Jerphagnon.
Good morning. I'm going to take you a little bit outside the building. We're going to go across California, and I'm going to put my slides on and we'll get started. Here we go. So I thought to stress the importance to bridge the gap between research and practical applications today. I'm going to talk to you some of the things we've done with the Energy Commission in the last few years. Our collaborators are the West Hills College in Collier, who provides a lot of the education and training in the West Central Valley near Coalinga. It's an old oil and gas area that has been very active in farming in the last 30 years. And Stuart will talk more about that. And obviously the University of California Cooperative Extension that has been, pushing the research and outreach since the Land Act program started. So with that in mind, I just want to use data as a vehicle to look across the water, energy, and food sector. The other panelists will talk about that in a lot more detail. Deborah with water, energy, food with Stuart. What I'm going to do today is try to highlight a few opportunities to do things better with almost no additional energy. The first example will be to find out that water management is difficult. There are different ways to do it, but there's actually already an energy infrastructure that can provide information at a very low cost with no additional energy. On the energy side, obviously, the cost and the energy of pumping has been increasing significantly in the last 30 years because of overdrafting of the groundwater basin. It's now being regulated. But one of the success stories in California is solar has been a great tool for farms to adapt to this increased energy intensity. One of the things people forget is, irrigation used to be mostly a flood using gravity. So being efficient in water sometimes has a cost in energy intensity using pressurized water. And so solar is a very interesting solution. So more than half the farms now in Central Valley have adopted solar. So, it's a new asset to manage. We'll talk also a little bit about the food part, and it's important to be humble and recognize the amazing work people do, especially this summer where the, air quality and the COVID-19 constraints made, harvest very difficult. So we got to make things simpler for people in the field. And I'll show you a couple examples where we had to adapt our research to be meaningful. And again, you have to be really humble coming into this field. A couple of words on Powwow that became Agmonitor. We're basically taking a lot of public data and using AI to give 80% of the answer at 20% of the cost, and then we let the farms include some of their on-farm data. And Chandra will talk about that in terms of how to make data collection and processing at the farm much more efficient. Here, I'm really going to stress a public-private partnership message. And thanks to the Energy Commission, we looked at two disadvantaged areas and what it means in California. You look at income, air quality, opportunity for economic development. And so the area near Huron, 97% population is Latino. The area near McFarland that people know through the Disney movie, more diverse, but in both areas, very, very active and a lot of issues. And so we were lucky to have some partners to welcome us in those communities. And since then, we've been working with most of the farms. And so I'll share with you a couple of things that we learned. My perspective is not to be divisive, but quite to the contrary, to find common ground, to work together. It comes to me naturally. And for people who are trying to understand still why I work in telecom and agriculture, which is really different, that's because I just, of the place I grew up in, it just happens that Brittany, this northwest part of France, is the most intensive ag region in Europe. At the same time, the location of a large number of hub of submarine networks and satellites. And so here is a map of the region I grew up, and you can see it's a very vibrant industry with a majority of the jobs. Here the circle represents companies of 20 to 100 people, up to 400 to 500. Very diverse food and ag sector. And the telecom industry has really had an impact in terms of providing more education infrastructure. So we went through a very difficult transition about 30 years ago. I grew up in that environment. And 30 years later, it was a big success. Some of the things that are quite interesting, in 2018, France won the World Cup. The head of the federation is actually a grower and food processor. So imagine the equivalent of the NFL commissioner being a farmer. Well, that's the case in France. Another things I want to point out from farming communities, it's a very strong family-oriented community. We had a wonderful girl adopted by a family 40 years ago. Her name is Dominique Crenn, and she decided to pursue a dream to provide amazing taste of food. She moved to the United States about 20 years ago, and she's the first woman with 3 stars Michelin. So some of those are interesting success stories to point that, you can really bring the food, technology, and resource management together. In Brittany, we don't have a problem with water, but we have a huge problem with nitrates. You'll see here a picture of beaches overwhelmed by algae. When I grew up, we used to clean once a year in May before the tourism session would come. Now it's every 2 weeks. So we do have nitrate management problem. Coming back to California, we surveyed about 30 farms, sampling really, across the board, small and large farms, different areas. And by and large, the water and labor issues were very prevalent. In terms of energy and pest, came in a second group. Energy rising costs, big concern Central Valley. The issue of new pests and diseases, especially in the citrus industry, was a major concern also on the coast. The smaller farms are also voice the issue of the market volatility in prices. So farming is difficult. And so let's start with probably the most important topic, water. It's actually quite hard to measure. And I'm going to use this example. I'm going to show you 3 algorithms today, how we can be helpful. So you have a smart meter at your home. It turns up, there's one at each pump, each solar array. So the question we asked 5 years ago, is there something you can do with that data? Is there a water meter that we don't know that exists? So in a typical process to develop algorithm, the not sexy story is it takes a lot of time to clean the data and explore what's going on and develop a data model. what is useful is you can actually, from a company's perspective, probably send some alerts about new unusual patterns. We found out we could tell about a month prior when a well was going to go run dry, so that gave enough time for the farms to develop an alternative. So some of those services we did about 3 years ago, but to be able to use more advanced machine learning and look at energy data, understand what it means for a pump, for example, and come up with like a predictor, in this case, how much water is being pushed through a pump. It takes a couple of years. Where we are now, 3 or 4 years later, after training the algorithm, and we have about 50 sites, we keep ground truthing throughout the state. We're at the point now, this new method of water measuring water is completely approved by the state. It meets the certification from the Title 23 of the California Code of Regulations. Just to give you an idea how it works, you're just pushing out the data that is already used by the billing department of PG&E, for example, so there's no additional cost or energy, and you just put a little algorithm in a data center, and you're computing the data, and you can spit out daily water records. Our error is about plus or minus 3%, and one of the beauty of machine learning, you can actually know what is the statistical variability. So for the most common report, which is about monthly records, which the groundwater basin are looking at today, we're looking at 2% standard deviation. So we're way under the 10% mark. Recently, we kind of turned the table over, which says, there are some set of public data coming from the Department of Water Resources. Those huge satellite images are being processed to create some of those water demand maps. They're looking at the process of evaporation and transpiration at the surface of the earth. Those are public. You can also look at the groundwater tables that are measured every October and every April. And so if you use the model we developed, you can turn the thing over its head and generate some energy heat maps. And in this case, in Delano, we were able to predict that the wells on the east side, at the base of the Sierras, would get into trouble. And sure enough, this year, we were able to verify that. Clustering is really a key. I won't talk too much about that today, but you have to organize the data in a way that you can make comparisons. So in this case, we're grouping the fields by crops, and the clusters are where the water table is similar. And in this case, we're trying to solve a problem for the CPUC, which is, right now for 10 pump tests, they get a pump retrofit project. It's like the Energy Star program for pumps. They like to have like a more 2-to-1 ratio. So how can you target energy incentives to the areas that need it the most? That's actually an important topic, I think, for more than just energy, is how do you serve those communities in a more effective way? Let's switch to energy. I already talked a little bit of that. I'm going to start zooming into the area of Huron. For some people who are not accustomed to this area of California, it's between LA and San Francisco, and many of you have probably driven by the Harris Ranch, got some tri-tip there. So that's where the stop for the first Tesla charging station was. And this is the area we're talking about. This area is in the wetland water district, and maybe Stuart will talk a little bit more about that in the session later, but it's very sensitive to surface water location. And so in drought years, it's very high energy intensive. You can see here, there's many fields that have a high energy intensity because they have permanent crop. Luckily, the farms are smart and they're using crop rotation. Annual crops don't have to be planted every year, so they can adapt to that. And so that's one way to mitigate that. The other piece is solar. Solar has tremendous use here and has been widely adopted by small and large farms. On the left, you see a small farm near Coalinga, managed by a young couple of farmers in their 30s. It's an investment. They're trying to make a living as a small mom and pop farm. On the right side, at the very east end of the Huron area, a multi-generational farm has 3 large 1 megawatt arrays. So, whether you're small or large, that's the only way you can, afford to pump during a drought years. So one of the things we developed for those areas is simple algorithm to compare what the output of the solar array should be. It's actually pretty easy if you look at radiation and compare with the production out and measured by the meter. And by comparing those two, you can actually tell when there's a drop. So this is an example. In 2019, we sent an alert and they cleaned in August, and you can see the energy production of the solar array in green is coming back up. This year, it's a dry year. They're going to use more pumping, and it's their interest to use all the energy credits to cover for that cost. So this year, we're advising them to do a second cleaning. They haven't done it yet because of the fires, but they're going to do it soon, and that will give them a better return on investment. One of the things I want to point out, and again, if you're thinking about my background, is how do you work within the community? It turns out there's a lot of assets. For example, SC as an education center in Tulare, one of the 3 big counties in agriculture with Fresno and Kern County. Our alerts, that's nice, but if someone is not going to clean the array, that's a moot point. So we have helped connect a number of farmers who developed their own solar cleaning kit. In some other cases, they don't have the equipment, or they can't find a contractor because they're all focused on the utility size arrays. So here's a gentleman who has his own dairy, didn't like the bill from PG&E or SC, and developed his own clean technique. And that gentleman started to get phone calls. He started a new business, employed a couple of people, and he's actually cleaning solar arrays in this area. So we send the alerts to him and to the farms, and that created jobs locally. So that's the type of things that can be a virtuous economy, and I think data can play a big role to create new jobs. Again, people have to have opinion in those communities, to stay in those communities, to have an impact. Doing things only from the area is not the approach. Some of the data can be processed there, but we're here to empower those communities. The last example I'm going to use is the food industry, the food production, I'm sorry. So water, we knew what we were doing. We developed a full stack of algorithms. We got the answer we wanted. In the case of energy, we were led by the farming customers that told us that they have some issues in managing energy and the solar infrastructure they just built. I just want to be honest and share with you a case where we started with an idea and we got it wrong, and we had to kind of have long conversations with the farming industry to kind of figure something that was useful. So we started with a really cool project fusing all kind of data, and we were able to actually track the level of water stress in every single tree on a field. Problem is the people on the field were actually using the information live in a very different environment, and they're dealing with a lot of different activities: spraying pesticide, preparing the ground, tractor activities, irrigation, applying fertilizers. So everything is more around a schedule, trying to get the most hours of every day. And 70% of the workforce speaks Spanish. So what we realized that was completely useless. And so we worked with them, and what we learned is they were going from manual irrigation to automated, and they needed a simple tool in Spanish and English that could allow them to really collaborate. So here's an example of our agronomist working with a farm manager at Bulls Farming in Los Banos and one of the Spanish-speaking irrigator. And they were able to use that platform because it was simple to use. So imagine now you have a field and you're working by blocks. I just want to show you what technology can do. This is an olive organic field for oil production, and interestingly, it was interrupted by the high-speed train program. So that's why you have this huge cut in the middle of the field, create a lot of leaks and other problems. So the farmer asked for help, and we actually saw that he had some irrigation and pruning problems. And so in the olive industry, because the trees are alternate bearing, the thing that really is an economic problem is you have some good years, 6 tons per acre, and some very bad years at 3 tons per acre. So we work with them block by block using those type of technologies, and they went from 3 tons per acre in off years to 5, and they stayed around 5.5 to 6 ton in good years. So big improvement, much more predictable and even production. Like I said, having good technology is not always useful. Are actually people using it in the field? So we found that the irrigation schedule was not always implemented correctly. We actually track that from an oil quality point of view by tracking the moisture in the olive. That's the y-axis here. I'm sorry, the x-axis, and the amount of fat in the y-axis. And so whether weather events like rainfall or too much irrigation, the olive was not getting the maturity they needed to be harvested. So we developed a model, and we've been able to predict the best time to harvest now for a couple of years within 2 days, a month in advance. So here's an example where the oil production went from 22 gallons per ton, so the same amount of olives coming into the mill, but because the amount of fat in the olive is higher, they're able to get 31 gallons per ton. The last story I want to share with you is, sometimes you get lucky here. We have great relationship with the grower, and in addition says, you know what, I'm hearing a lot of things about phenols. The European market and other markets are mentioning that extra virgin olive oil has a lot of health benefits. So the issue is, how do you combine economic output, the oil production, with, such a quality attribute? And so in this case, it turned that within a window of 1 week or 2, the optimum time to harvest for quantity is about the same time for the peak in phenol content. So we kind of help them build a little tracker. And at the end of the day, we are what we eat. I was lucky to witness a day at that particular mill, a phone call they had from a mother in Ireland that was looking for really high quality olive oil to treat the autism for her son. And it's actually now pretty well established in Europe. You can get a health claim label for high quality olive oil. So we are what we eat. With that, Chandra, I'll give you back the baton.
Thank you so much, Olivier. I can take a question or two. We have about a few minutes to do so. We'll also have a chance for you to ask questions of Olivier at the end as part of a panel discussion that we're going to have. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A board or the chat. I have one question for you, Olivier, as we wait to make sure we can answer anybody else's questions. Where do you see your focus at Agmonitor going in the near term? Is it going to be in these services that you've just talked about on the food side, or is this going to be a combination of approaches, or what's sort of your next steps?
Sure. What we found is that the human factor is very important. So we've developed our data platform as more an enterprise software to be able to serve each and every one in the team. So whether you're in the field with a text alert or an accountant getting an email, we're just trying to coordinate all that information. So the algorithms are in the background, but if you don't present it at the right time to the right person, that value is not captured. So I think mobile app with Spanish translation is one of the things we're doing right now, working closely with large farms. We're trying to get that information use at the right time at the right place. So that's kind of our focus right now.
Fantastic work. All right, so we'll stop there and we'll hand it back to Mark. Oh yeah, please.
So Olivier, this seems like it's really ideal for sort of second level thinking. I mean, it seemed like you first focused on sort of how do you maximize production, you know, the most grapes or the most almonds per acre, whatever. But in the end, obviously flavor matters, as you mentioned, phenols and things like that. So it must be really subtle, I mean, to know that answer. And so I don't know if you can use machine learning or artificial intelligence, whatever, but what's, you know, your product, it seems to will grow more complex over time. Is that true?
It is complex in the sense that you have to provide more modules. You know, you have to be able to understand for fertilizers, you have to be understand all the different inputs. So it's basically chemicals, labor, pesticides, energy, and water. So you got to cover enough ground to be able to be meaningful. But the problem is the same. It's just an optimization problem. And so what's different with the ag industry, and I saw a comment in the Q&A, is there's a lot of external factors. So farming is very difficult because this is one of the industry where you put a lot of investment up front and you don't control 100% the outcome. So this is very, very risky. And so what our platform does is, you know, if you have a problem one year, like you have a lot of rain, we're finding that, you know, there are a lot of energy credits they can't use. We had a case in Huron, one of our farmer, you know, had $20,000 of energy credits not used. He has to know that early in the year because he could sell that water. I mean, that could be used in a meaningful way. So it is challenging, and there's some service scalability challenge that we faced, and we are solving that using SaaS business practices. But to be meaningful, you have to adapt to the environment for a farm to be profitable year over year, because the challenge that they face change every year. You know, 5 years ago it was the drought. This year that's not the drought. It's, you know, a number of other regulations like pricing that hit them. So you got to give them tools to make decisions, and the parameters change a little bit, but it's the same process. The other comment I would say is you have to think about a non-zero sum game. And again, that's why I was talking about Brittany. You know, 10 years ago, the nitrate situation was brutally managed by the state, because we had a couple of people dying on the beach because of the outgassing of the sulfur in the algae. So basically they shut down a lot of the pig industry. You know, the manure was controlled. It's gone in Brittany, but, you know, we had some economic issues. And so now they're trying to find a more collaborative method. So, you know, we're able to get, you know, back to almost 100% output in Brittany. It's a $12 billion industry, and the beaches are fine, but, you know, they have to use technology to track every amount of nitrates. So we got to be collaborative. And so those tools are necessary for the different stakeholders to work together to maintain food production while respecting the environment.
Thanks.
So Chandra, I think Stuart may have a question, and there was also one on the Q&A tool.
I think Olivier saw that and answered it about the variability in the ag industry and how hard it is to develop these individual solutions, but the underlying technology is similar. But Olivier, Stuart mentions that for large growers, you ran into this, the tree by tree management is just not feasible from an operations perspective. They are usually, managing their properties on a much coarser grain.
Exactly.
Can you speak a little bit about how to bridge that gap? Because there's opportunities if we do become more fine grain.
Sure. So one of the things that we did with Stuart is explore the automation of irrigation in the context of, labor constraints, education. And there's three things we learned. The first related to the tree level management. We kept, in the room with something interesting and cool, but nobody was interested, at a large scale, whether it was on the east side of the valley, on the west side. So the joke in the Valley is 70% of the ideas that come from the Bay Area are completely disconnected from reality. So that's one of them. You have 10 ideas and most of them are not going to be useful. So you got to be humble and just move on. What we found was a very difficult challenge. If you're going to manage things by block, some of them are going to be irrigated manually with a certain workflow. Some others are going to be automated over time for a number of factors to be more precise in the application for water and fertility. So how do you develop a framework so those two things can be done? And we've tried that pretty successfully in a number of medium-sized farms, like 1 to 5,000 acres. Beyond 10, 20,000 acres, you got to really have everything working. And the last piece we're doing right now in collaboration with Bristol College is to get that mobile app. So tens of irrigators can actually, manage each block. So we're working at a scale of, 1,000 trees or 3,000 trees. You can't work at a tree by tree level. It just doesn't make sense. This is not gardening. This is production ag. But we do believe over time, that information pushed on the field will equip, the staff in the field to manage every acre like it was theirs.
Wow. Well, thanks, Olivier. That was great.